is finally here. Week 1 is already upon us. We're going to be diving into each and every matchup on this week's slate, talking through the stacks, the facts, film nuggets, as well as the all-important start-sit decisions. If you're looking for a specific matchup, there'll be timestamps along the bottom. We'll save Thursday night football and this week's special Friday night Brazil game till the end, but we're going to kick things off with the Sunday main slate. Starting off with the Houston Texans at the Indianapolis Colts. Decent over-under in this one, Tom. Is this one that you're going to be targeting for a lot of your lineups this week?
Yeah, it's kind of hard to ignore this matchup because it's got everything we'd kind of want. It's got the two second-year quarterbacks who have plenty of hype behind them. It's got a bunch of really exciting wide receivers on one side of the field with the Texans. On the Colts, there's lots of potential there. The running backs on both sides, there's reasons to believe, particularly early on in the season, that, they can be good. And I'm really expecting Jonathan Taylor to come out and be able to take another leap. I don't think we're ever going to see him be the RB1 overall again, but I think Jonathan Taylor can be a top 5 running back this year. I think that when you look at the Colts, A.D. Mitchell is a very exciting prospect, even if he's a little boom bust. And there's a lot of questions about how things shake out here. So, yeah, I'm very keen on this one. I think everybody's waiting to see, does Anthony Richardson still rush the ball around the goal line? And I'm expecting Jonathan Taylor to reclaim some of that.
Yeah, it feels like these are two of the teams that have probably got the biggest question marks heading into the season in terms of Houston. Obviously, a huge amount of new options added, shall we say, in terms of Stephon Diggs and also Joe Mixon added to the offense. How's that going to play out after a phenomenal season from CJ Stroud last year? Are we going to be able to see Tank Dell, Stephon Diggs, Nico Collins, Joe Mixon, Dalton Schultz all be fantasy relevant? And then on the Colts side, we know Jonathan Taylor is probably going to be a top end running back. We hope that Anthony Richardson can stay healthy and be a top end quarterback. But what on earth is going to happen with the rest of this offense? Is there any tight end that finally makes themselves relevant? I'm not fully convinced, but
Nope.
Josh Downs was having a phenomenal preseason and a phenomenal training camp. And then obviously the unfortunate high ankle sprain, looking like maybe this week's going to be a bit too early for him, potentially next week. But Michael Pittman absolutely feasted on those RPOs last year with Gardner Minshew. Are we still going to see that same diet of RPOs for Pittman? Or are we potentially going to see maybe Josh Downs start to sneak into that if he's healthy, or Anthony Richardson maybe throwing less? So could that impact Pittman? So yeah, I feel like there's an awful lot of question marks going into this matchup. On the start-sit side, it feels fairly straightforward on this. Would you agree? There's kind of start the studs and not much else.
Yeah, I think Joe Mixon is a fringe starter for me. I know you've got him as a top 20 running back. For me, I have a few doubts about him because the argument against Joe Mixon is always that he ends up banged up as the season goes on and he doesn't run as hard in like week 16 as he does in like week 5. But this year coming in off a training camp where he's barely practiced and Cam Akers has looked really explosive. I just wonder whether they're going to ease Joe Mixon in a little bit, whether we see Dameon Pierce out there at all for kind of like one last try. So the Texans running backs, I'm trying to stay away from Joe Mixon. If you're in a typical league where you're starting 2 running backs in a flex, then maybe I'll start Joe Mixon if I don't like a matchup from one of my depth running backs. But outside of that, yeah, it's fairly cut and dry. I think you can start all 3 of the Texans wide receivers. I've got all 3 ranked within the top 36 wide receivers this week. A.D. Mitchell, I think he can be incredibly exciting. I think he can be really good. And these are the kind of high points matchups where we normally want to roll out a player like that. But I need to see it first before I'm willing to put him out there. And as for the rest, as you can see on the screen, like it's just a whole bunch of sit all the tight ends on both sides and sit Alec Pierce because he seems like he's been supplanted by A.D. Mitchell for the time being.
Yeah, I think Alec Pierce is going to have his role of running an awful lot of routes, running deep every play and never seeing the ball. With the Texans wide receivers, how have you got them lined up this week? So we've obviously got Nico Collins, Stephon Diggs, Tank Dell. How have you got them as a 1, 2, 3?
So I've got Nico Collins as my wide receiver 12, very high on him this week. Stephon Diggs down in the back ends of the 20s, wide receiver 28, and then Tank Dell at wide receiver 33. Just giving the edge to Stephon Diggs over Tank Dell because it sounds like at least to start the season, Stephon Diggs could be playing in the 2 wide receiver sets.
Yeah, so I've got similar. Nico's at 9 for me. I've got Dell ahead of Diggs, but it is pretty much back to back. So yeah, it feels like Nico's a must start, and then the other two are solid kind of wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3s. Before we move on to the next matchup, though, if you are finding us for the first time, we will get you covered for everything Dynasty, DFS, redraft, and of course, Bets Ball. Hit that subscribe button. You'll not regret it. The next matchup we're going to cover Tennessee at Chicago. This is Caleb Williams' debut game. It feels like there's a hell of a lot of hype. This is, I think, in my NFL fandom, the greatest situation any 101 quarterback has ever found themselves. But can you start him and all the Chicago Bears in this offense this week?
So in my fantasy pros column, where I go over risky and safe starts every week, I put Caleb Williams in as one of the safest starts. And perhaps I'm drinking the preseason Kool-Aid, but like we're talking about a guy who has looked impeccable in preseason, who is exactly as advertised, who, as you pointed out, has an incredible surrounding cast around him. And then you look at this Tennessee team. Last year, they were complete pass funnel. They were good against the run, but really poor against the pass. Yes, they added L'Jarius Sneed from the Chiefs, but I don't think that they've fixed everything. I think you're still going to be able to pass on them. I think when you look at the implied team totals, Chicago had a 24.5 implied team total this week, one of the highest on the slates. And this is exactly what we want. We want this kind of passing setup. So yeah, I'm starting Caleb. I'm starting DJ Moore, starting Keenan Allen. I'm not buying into the fat Keenan narrative. I think that, he's a player that we never see really in preseason. And so try to take away from that and say, well, he didn't do very well in preseason. So what? I don't care. I think it's more Rome Odunze who I'd struggle to see his role straight from the go, and I'd need to possibly see what he does in week 1 to have any confidence in starting him in week 2. If you're playing in a deeper league, then I don't mind starting him. But if you're only starting 2-3 wide receivers in a flex, then I'm probably looking elsewhere.
Yeah, it feels a little bit risky to be starting some of those deeper rookies this early in the season, particularly in a situation where there are plenty of other wide receivers that are going to get targets. On the Tennessee side, it feels like there's just question marks all over the place, doesn't it? What is Will Levis? This backfield, how's it going to shake up? We know Tajay Spears, Tony Pollard, like them both, but is there going to be enough carries? Is there going to be enough targets to go around? And then wide receiver side, it sounds like DeAndre Hopkins is going to play. Is he fully healthy? Is he going to be able to separate? And what usage is I guess Calvin Ridley going to have as well? So yeah, a lot of question marks in Tennessee. I'm very excited to see the new offensive coordinator, head coach, how it's all going to play out and what Tennessee are going to do this year. Moving across to the start-sit sides, I guess, you covered a lot of them there. The big question for me, we've kind of stuck our necks out on the line on DeAndre Swift this offseason. We've had a little bit of pushback for, I think, both being significantly lower than consensus. Do you feel like you can start him this week, or is it a case of you need to see how this offense, how this backfield's going to go before you can stick him in that lineup?
So I've got Swift as my running back 24 this week. So yeah, I mean, in most leagues, that's going to result in starting him. And part of that is because of the implied team total, because I think the way that Swift plays, it is going to be picking up points in the passing game, which is something I like in this matchup. But on the whole, I don't feel confident about him. Like you said, we've had a lot of people comment on the channel saying that we're completely off base with DeAndre Swift, but I've just never seen it. We've never really seen the consistency, and we don't need to get into that right now. But generally in this game, I'm staying away from the running backs if I have a better option. You can see we've got DeAndre Swift in the sits column. If you need to start him, start him. But I'm trying to find a matchup that I like slightly better with a player who I have a little bit more confidence in for this week. But as we both said, we have a bit of a bias against DeAndre Swift.
Yeah, absolutely. I won't tell you where I've got him ranked, but he's outside my top 36 this week. So another player outside my top 36, though, Calvin Ridley. I know you've got him in the starts column. I'm a little bit more nervous on him. The Bears have got probably a top 3 secondary in the league. I don't know if we're going to see Will Levis and this Titans offense pass enough to warrant being comfortable starting him. So for me, I need to see it a little bit before I can stick him in that lineup.
Yeah, he's my wide receiver 34, so he's by no means somebody that I'm super high on. I think that it's definitely fair to question what his role's going to be straight from the go. And I've got DeAndre Hopkins just outside of the top 40 as well. So I don't mind starting them if you're in deep leagues, like I'm saying, and I don't mind if you're looking for a flex play, either Calvin Ridley or DeAndre Hopkins. I have more faith in DeAndre Hopkins. I've ranked him a little bit lower than Ridley simply because in consensus rankings and according to projections, he's so low. But I think I wouldn't be surprised if DeAndre Hopkins comes out and has a great week. We know he's not the kind of player who enjoys training camp.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you have got start sit questions, trade questions, or you just want to know what Tom's got under his hat, give those questions in the comments below. We will answer 100% of the questions we get all the way up to kickoff on Sunday. The next matchup we're going to dive into, Arizona at Buffalo. This feels like this could be a bit of a shootout. Two fairly impressive offenses, defenses. Buffalo's taken a step back. I'm not sure Arizona's taken a step forward in about 3 years. Is this one that you're particularly targeting?
Yeah, I mean, it's probably going to be quite, if you're looking at DFS, it's going to be quite a chalky matchup because it's got two dual threat quarterbacks, a bunch of pass catchers who we all expect to be fairly good on both sides of the ball when you're talking about Kincaid, when you're talking about McBride, and obviously Marvin Harrison Jr. From a matchups point of view, this one, it just feels fun because the Bills, their secondary, it's not a particularly great situation. There's a lot of players a lot of turnover. We're going to see Damar Hamlin make his first start since he suffered his on-field incident a couple of years ago. We're going to see like guys playing there who haven't been a staple part of the Bills secondary over the last couple of years. So that's going to be very interesting. On the Cardinals side, though, I'm really high on the Cardinals this year. I think that Kyler Murray showed enough last year when he came back averaging 30.5 rush yards per game that we should have every bit of faith a year further removed from the ACL injury, a year more comfortable with this new offense fit. Last year, he was in the treatment room trying to learn. I think that the Cardinals can absolutely take a leap, but I think their defense is going to be absolutely rubbish, which means that it's going to be a huge amount of points, which is exactly what we want.
Absolutely. And the best thing for this Cardinals offense is it's probably going to be fairly consolidated in terms of Kyler, Connor, Marvin Harrison, McBride, and that's about it, which is an absolute dream situation for fantasy. The one thing I'm fascinated to see this week is the Buffalo Bills running back usage. We know that James Cook is electric, good in space, great in the receiving game, but they drafted Ray Davis for a reason. And I think he's got a really nice complementary skill set to James Cook. How those two shake out this week and over the next few weeks is definitely something I'm going to be monitoring because I feel like Ray Davis could carve out a significant role and maybe a role that sees him being fantasy relevant. On the start sit side, this feels really straightforward, doesn't it? In terms of you start your studs and you sit basically anyone that you're not quite sure about because there's not really much outside of the consolidated options that you'd expect.
Yeah, I mean, I've been high on Curtis Samuel all off season. I think that he will grow into a really good role now that he's reunited with Joe Brady. I think that he offers something that none of the other Bills wide receivers do. But coming off a turf toe injury, which kept him out of training camp for a bit, I'm not particularly interested in starting in week one unless I absolutely have to. And if you have to, then you've probably got big issues with your roster in general. Keon Coleman's going to be a really exciting player, but again, it's seeing that role from him before we can really trust it. I don't mind Greg Dortch in deeper leagues because I think he can be a bit of a PPR scam, but otherwise, yeah, pretty cut and dry.
Yeah, I've got a decision in my Scott Fishbowl lineup of Khalil Shakir versus Greg Dortch, and I'm going back and forth on it basically all week, and I think I will be up until Sunday. The next one we're going to dive into, the Battle of Florida, Jacksonville at Miami, one of the highest over-unders on the slate. This feels like this could be one to target.
Yeah, definitely. And the key for me is 2 points. One is the Jacksonville offensive line improved enough where Trevor Lawrence can stay upright and really play without feeling pressure constantly. Last year, particularly over the second half of the season, he was constantly facing pressure. You know, the offensive line was missing players. There was guys in there who weren't up to NFL standards. Now you've added Mitch Morse from the Bills, who only allowed one sack all year playing at center. You've got basically slight improvements at various points. Guys who were injured last year who should be healthy at least to start the season. So they can keep Lawrence upright. And if you've got Brian Thomas Jr. and Gabe Davis clearing out the middle of the field and like taking defensive attention downfield, does that open things up for Christian Kirk if he's healthy enough to play? It sounds like he is. But then is Christian Kirk playing on 3 wide receiver sets? Last year, we had the same kind of narrative that he was coming off the field a lot, and then lo and behold, he ends up on the field. And Trevor Lawrence's splits with Christian Kirk playing are about 5 points more per game than they are without him. So I think Christian Kirk's going to be out there. I'll start him with confidence. On the Miami side, it's just kind of wheels up for Devon Achan to prove that he can play a bigger role. There were reports that he gained a bit of weight this offseason, that he's going to be used further downfield in the passing game than he previously has. I believe Josh Norris pointed out that in preseason, he had a catch 15 yards downfield. That was like 5 yards further than at any point during his rookie season. So yeah, I'm playing Devon Achan, I'm playing Jalen Waddle, I'm playing Tyreek Hill. The Jags side, starting Christian Kirk. I don't mind taking a shot on Brian Thomas Jr. I mean, that's one which is going to be a little bit of a dart throw, but I think his upside is huge.
Yeah, I'm all in on Brian Thomas. I know we talked about some of the other rookies. You want to see it before we kind of roll forward. I think Brian Thomas has potentially got the upside that he could break the slate this week. He's a top 30 option for me, and he's one that I'm much more confident starting than the rest of the guys. Moving across to the Carolina and the Saints game, this feels a little bit more disgusting. Low over under down at 41.5. Is there anyone you're comfortable starting in this matchup?
I don't mind starting Deontay Johnson. I think we've talked about all off season. We're known Deontay Johnson truthers. Like Deontay Johnson is a perfect match for Bryce Young because of the way that he plays. He gets open, he separates. Bryce Young is good at anticipating that. So it would be nice to see a good game from both of them. I've got no interest really diving into like the Adam Thielens, Xavier Legetts of the world when it comes to the Panthers. Chuba Hubbard seems likely to get a good amount of touches, which if this offensive line is going to be a strength for the Panthers after they poured considerable resources into it this offseason, then it makes sense that maybe Chuba Hubbard could give you some early season production. Like if you started 0 RB or hero RB in your drafts and you're looking at question marks for that RB2 position or your flex position, then Chuba Hubbard's somebody that I don't mind playing. I do think this is going to be an ugly game. I think that there's going to be a lot of question marks within it. I think that when you look at the Saints side of things, that there's a lot of issues there. I'm not quite ready to just go, okay, well, they've got a new offensive coordinator, everything's going to be fixed. But I don't mind playing Chris Olave, of course. You've got to start someone like him. And I think if you're going to play Chris, and if you're going to play Alvin Kamara, this is the week to do it because the Carolina defense is still going to be poor.
Yeah, I really like the Hubbard pick. I think if you've got him on your roster, this is the point at which you need to be starting him. I think this is when he's going to see volume and it could be fantastic. But you didn't mention the most important player on the slate this week. Taysom Hill, he is my start of the week. He is a top 6 tight end for me this week. His usage is just bonkers. How this new offensive coordinator, Clint Kubiak, is using him and how he's planning on using him based on the preseason is phenomenal. We saw him lining up in the backfield, at tight end, in the slot, out as a true X receiver. Like you said, this game's going to get ugly. And whenever I think a Saints game's going to get ugly, that's a Taysom Hill week for me. How many players at the tight end spot could get you 5-6 targets, but also 5-6 carries and some goal line usage? Like I'm really excited about what he's going to be. I think he's an absolute must start if you've got him on your roster. Yes, it's a little bit risky, but outside of those truly elite options at tight end, I don't see many better.
Yeah, Taysom's one who I had trouble with trying to do my rankings this week, and at the minute I've got him outside the top 12. But I agree with everything you've said, and in my DFS write-up, which is in the Discord, if you want to get access to that, hit the join button below and choose the gold tier. I wrote Taysom up because he's only 4,300 on DraftKings, and it seems like he's the only player who Dennis Allen actually likes on the Saints, and I'm just willing to lean into the idea that the Saints are going to lean heavily on him because he's such a cheat code and so hard for defenses to cover.
Absolutely. And we saw Clint Kubiak come from that 49ers world where, they dictate to defenses because they've got unique bodies, unique skill sets like Debo, like Cole Juszczyk, like George Kittle, who can line up all over the field. I think Taysom Hill is going to be the Saints version of that. So, yeah, very excited. We're 20 minutes in. If you are still here, be that 31% of people that have hit the subscribe button. Don't be in that other percent. Let's click subscribe, join us, and you will not regret it. Diving into the Patriots at the Bengals. first of all, do we know if Chase is starting this week? I guess that's probably the biggest question mark over this matchup.
Yeah, so on Wednesday he practiced after not practicing previously, but it seems like there's still a lot to be sorted out with the Bengals. If reading between the lines, this feels like one where the agent is really trying to push what leverage they have to get Jamar Chase paid this season. And of course, you should do that simply because Jamar Chase is out there watching T. Higgins playing on the franchise tag and having seen the way that the Bengals completely ballsed it up when it came to a contract yet again because they're such a cash poor organization. We've seen this with them more than once. And now Chase, why would he want to go a further year without getting paid? So yeah, very much in the camp that Jamar Chase should be paid before the season starts. And maybe he does by the time that people are even watching this. But if he is out there, how rusty is he going to be? Yes, he had one practice, but he hasn't practiced very much this offseason. I'm always a little bit wary of that, and it makes T. Higgins a lock to start for me. When you look at the running back room, guys like Zach Moss and Chase Brown, who are dueling it out on the Bengals side, I think Zach Moss is going to start the season seeing more touches than Chase Brown will, so I don't mind starting Zach Moss early. And then on the other side, Ramondre Stevenson is about the only Patriots player that I could view as a lock to start. Like you look at the guys like Hunter Henry, Demario Douglas, Jalen Polk, KJ Osborne. Like if you haven't to start any of them at this point, things are looking pretty bleak.
Yeah, I'm really fascinated by this Bengals backfield. I think the key for me is going to be those passing downs where the running back is kept in to pass protect. Are we just going to see Moss rolled out in those? If so, I think he's probably going to be a 60-70% opportunity guy to start the season. But if the Bengals truly trust Chase Brown, we know he's more explosive. We know he can score from anywhere on the field. That's going to be wheels up for me. I'm going to be looking to buy some Chase Brown shares early on in the season if he's getting some of those pass protection snaps. The other takeaway for me is go out and buy Drake May. Like we know, Tom and I have both been incredibly high on him through the offseason. We know that he's likely not going to start, but he will find the field at some point on this year. And I think that as soon as Jacoby Brissett starts playing, people are going to realize he's not very good. And I think that Drake May's price is only going to go up. So if you can sneak in now whilst people aren't counting him as a starter, whether that be a super flex, whether that be in Dynasty, whatever, I think you need to be going and acquiring some Drake May shares right now. Moving across to the Arthur Smith Bowl, obviously former Falcons head coach, now Pittsburgh Steelers offensive coordinator. Is this finally going to be the year for the Atlanta Weapons, or are they going to be held back yet again?
If not now, when? I mean, like Kyle Pitts, it's kind of at the point where he needs to sort his NFL future out and he needs a good season. Otherwise, we're going to be looking at a player entering his second contract possibly in a couple of years' time who really hasn't done anything. So if Kyle Pitts wants to get paid, this is the year he has to produce. If Drake London is going to pay off on all the offseason hype, which I've driven his way, then he needs to. But we know that Kirk Cousins is a far more accurate quarterback than what they've dealt with over the last couple of years in Marcus Mariota and Desmond Ridder. I mean, Desmond Ridder was a guy who was getting cut and then taken up on practice squads last week. Meanwhile, Kirk Cousins, yes, he's coming off the Achilles injury, but he's been the 10th most accurate quarterback over like the last 10 years. He's been incredibly good at getting his top targets to ball consistently. Teams he's on, they tend to pass the ball plenty. They tend to be getting accurate at targets. So I'm all in on the Falcons. I don't think this is the perfect matchup for him to start because for Steelers, they can turn games ugly at times. They're going to want to run the ball. They're going to take the air out of the sails for the Falcons. They're not going to let this turn into a shootout. You can see that from a 42-point over-under. And the Steelers are only 3-point underdogs. So it's probably not going to be like the massive points fest that I dreamed about the Falcons having, but I don't mind playing most guys in this game. Pat Freiermuth is one who I wouldn't because he's not been playing in 2 tight end sets in preseason. We see that when it becomes one of those formations, Freiermuth comes off the field and instead it's the big blocking tight ends coming in. So I don't have much faith in him. I've not been in on George Pickens this offseason, but if you drafted him with a top round 4 pick, if you drafted him inside the top 60 picks, then if you're not starting him against Falcons defense that isn't elite, then I'm not sure when you are going to start him.
Yeah, I guess the concern for Pickens is AJ Terrell going to follow him, or is he going to stay on one side of the field? You know,
Yeah.
it's a new head coach in Atlanta. It'll be a new defense. It'll be very interesting to see. We knew that AJ Terrell and the Falcons defense were very good last year at taking away number one wide receivers. Is that going to be something that continues into the new regime as we move forward? Looking across at start sits, now you're a little bit more confident in Najee and Jalen Warren than I am. I've got them as kind of flex options outside my top 24, but inside my top 36. Would you be comfortable putting him in as an RB2, or do you think they're more of a flex play this week?
I think for me, Najee Harris, he's just outside my top 24 running back. So in deeper leagues or teams where you're starting at least one flex, if you're starting two flexes, then very much he's in consideration. I just think that Jalen Warren is probably not going to get the run out that I, as a Jalen Warren hyper, would like him to do so in week one. And the soft tissue injury, the hamstring that kept him out of training camp for a while, that's not the kind of thing which running backs should be rushed back from. And I would imagine that the Steelers would like to play it smart and not put him out there straight away. So, yeah, I'm definitely expecting Najee Harris to have okay volume, but it's also because I'm not overly high on Russell Wilson or the Steelers passing game. I think that this is a game which is going to run through the ground for the Steelers. But yeah, outside of that, it feels fairly straightforward.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you do have those start sit questions, remember, get them in the comments below, and Tom and I will answer them all week. We answer 100% of those questions asked. Minnesota at New York Giants. We've got Brian Dable coming back to play call the offense. Is this going to be a rejuvenation of the Giants offense, or do we think they're going to continue to falter and be one of the worst offenses in the league?
Well, I think that it can be, but it all kind of rests on Daniel Jones' shoulders, really, doesn't it? I mean, he hasn't played well during training camp. He wasn't particularly good last year before the injuries, and he's a guy who we've seen pick up lots of little injuries over the course of his career, a guy who is incredibly up and down. We see the dual threat ability from him where he'll add a safe floor at times with his legs, but then he can be completely erratic and he can go missing at times. The one thing I don't have any concerns about is Malik Neighbors, who completely looks ready to just dominate in this league. Every clip out of training camp has been a Malik Neighbors highlight catch. And yes, as Josh Norris pointed out when he came on the show, that was the same kind of thing that we saw from Darren Waller last year, but I have complete faith in Malik Neighbors. When you look at the Vikings secondary, it's a lot of veterans. It's a lot of guys like Harrison Smith, who's entering his 13th season, 33-year-old Stephen Gilmore, Shaq Griffin, who's been dealing with a hamstring injury, and then Byron Murphy Jr., who also tends to get banged up a lot of the time. I think that Malik Neighbors can come in, see a large amount of volume straight away, and that his speed will be too much for those guys to deal with. I've got him inside my top 10 wide receivers this week.
Yeah, I think also the Vikings defense is one of the more unique defenses in the league. We know that they run 3 safety looks at the highest rate in the league. They also blitz at one of the highest rates in the league last year. I'm expecting that to continue this year. When you're preparing for them on a week's notice, it's a little bit tough. When you've had an entire off season to get yourself ready, to look at it, to prepare for this game, I'm thinking that Brian Dable's going to be prepared. He knows what's going to come, and when you're getting blitz, what you want to do, get the ball in your playmakers as quick as possible and let them work after the catch. Well, that's exactly what Malik Neighbors is, an absolute beast at. And I think it's a really great shout from you as a start of the week. On the other starts, I guess for me, the only real challenging start sit looking at this, I love Neighbors, Jefferson, Jones. I think Singletary's a really decent starting option this week. I'm a little bit nervous about Jordan Addison. We know that sometimes the lesser quarterbacks can kind of feed one option. I'm not convinced that they can get to the second. Are you comfortable that Sam Darnold is going to be able to give Addison enough volume for him to be a comfortable start this week?
Yeah, mainly because this scheme that we've seen in Minnesota, we saw how QB friendly it was last year, with guys like Josh Dobbs who were playing to a good enough standard. And Sam Darnold's had practically the entire offseason preparing his starter. The Vikings wanted him to go out there and at least start the season. So everything's been tailored around him. And yes, Jordan Addison is a bit of a numbskull, but he's been out there. He's been playing at, plenty of training camp with Sam Darnold. And I'd like to think that even though they're not going to have a viable threat at tight end, there's enough there for Jordan Addison to be able to gain relevancy. And we saw him find his way into the end zone plenty of times last year. And yes, touchdowns aren't sticky, but when you're talking about a wide receiver room, which is Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, and virtually nobody else, I'm okay betting on Jordan Addison in week 1. Probably not in your standard start 2-3 wide receivers in a flex league unless I need him in the flex. But in deeper leagues, I'll absolutely be rolling out Jordan Addison this week.
Now, moving across to the later slate of games, we have got the Raiders versus the Chargers. Feels like a couple of years ago, this was a really dreamy matchup. Could be slightly less exciting now. Do you think that we got Gardner Minshew under center for the Raiders? Do you think that he's going to be good enough to be able to force feed targets to Devontae Adams and keep this offense afloat?
No. Gardner Minshew ranked 34th in completion rate in 2023, and he's been an incredibly erratic player throughout his entire career. Yes, there's moments where he looks like a reasonable level NFL quarterback, and he's probably one of the top 45 quarterbacks available to the NFL. But I don't have much faith in him. I think that we're definitely going to see points where O'Connell starts this year. When it comes to Devontae Adams, I've faded him pretty aggressively this year. Yes, he had 167 targets last year with Jimmy Garoppolo and Aiden O'Connell, but he caught less than 100 of them. There were definitely weeks where he was seeing the ball come his way, but it didn't really matter. When the coaching change happened and they became very run heavy down the stretch, then there were games where Devontae Adams just completely disappeared and was a real lineup killer for you. So yeah, Devontae Adams isn't somebody I'm going to worry about starting or sitting because I just don't have him in any of my lineups this year. The running back position looked like it was going to be solidified around Zamir White, but then as preseasons rolled on, we've seen Alexander Mattison really mixing in a very heavy amount compared to what we expected, almost to the point where it's a 50-50 split. If that continues, then it's going to be really difficult for Zamir White to pay off, considering that he didn't find his way into the end zone very much at all last year. Yes, he was averaging like 95 rush yards per game over those 4 final weeks, but I think he scored 1 touchdown across those. So yeah, if I can not start most of the Raiders, I'll be pretty happy. The Chargers side, you look at J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards, they're fringe starters for me. I think that they're flex considerations more than anything else if you need them. Probably a wait and see how they do more than anything else, because I mean, we know they've had the health issues. Dobbins sounds like he's healthy, but I'm not sure you can count on that. I do think the offensive line is going to be a real strength for the Chargers and that they want to run the ball plenty, but I can't bring myself to start a single Chargers pass catcher.
No, I kind of agree with you completely, to be honest. Josh Palmer would be the only one that I'd kind of consider, but that's sort of deeper league flex plays. The guy that I want to keep an eye on and monitor, Brendan Rice for the Chargers, obviously rookie 7th round pick. If he can already start to carve out a role over DJ Chark in week 1, I think he could be on the fantasy radar by the end of the season. I think his profile could fit well in this offense. So keep a little eye on him. And if he's starting to already rotate in, I think he'd be a good target to go and buy in Dynasty. Denver at Seattle up next. 42 over under. Again, probably a game we're probably looking to avoid.
Yeah, I mean, I quite like JSN in this one. I think that you look at this new look offense and Tyler Lockett's been banged up throughout the offseason, turns 32 in a couple of weeks' time. Can JSN feast underneath whilst DK Metcalf has to deal with Patrick Surtain, who just got paid as the highest paid cornerback in the league? That would be an interesting battle. And I think if we get JSN not only operating in the slot, but downfield, keeping away from Surtain, then that could be a good week. Maybe we finally see some of that promise that we were hoping for. Outside of that, Kenneth Walker feels like a fine start. We've had an offseason where everything's broke right for him. All the hype seems to be around him. The new coach staff seem to want to use him as a pass catcher out of the backfield. That remains to be seen. He's definitely not somebody elite in that area. And then on the Broncos side, I don't know how you could start anyone outside of Cortland Sutton who isn't a running back. Like Javonte Williams seems like he's going to get the workload. Last year, the team never really wanted to push him over that kind of 16 carries per game. Maybe that doesn't happen now because there's Audric Estime and Jaleel McLaughlin there. But yeah, it's a really difficult one. In Superflex leagues, I will be starting Geno Smith. I have no problem with that. But Bo Nix, I can't imagine any scenario where I'm starting him.
No, absolutely. I think that Denver Broncos running back room is fascinating, isn't it? Because if it's going to be a three-headed monster, I don't think any of them are going to be particularly reliable for fantasy. If we see it stay as a two-headed backfield with Javonte and McLaughlin, I think both of them could be relevant. So the usage of Audric Estime this year, certainly to start the season, I think is going to be really interesting and probably says a lot about what this Denver Broncos offense is going to be moving forward. The next game we're moving to, Dallas at Cleveland. This is a Dallas team who basically no one's shown up to practice until recently. Are we confident that CeeDee Lamb is going to be rush-free and startable, or is there any concern there?
Not massively confident. I mean, I go back to the Deebo Samuel offseason where he had a very contentious contract situation, and then we saw him get paid. And then the season after that, he talked about how difficult it had been for him, how he never felt like he was in his groove because the offseason had weighed so heavily on him. And yes, CeeDee Lamb's a better wide receiver than Deebo Samuel, but it's kind of the same. If you've not been out there taking reps, if you've not been catching balls from Dak, it doesn't matter that you've been catching balls from some practice squad guy who you've been working out with or whatever. It is a very different situation. So I do have my worries about how quick CeeDee Lamb's going to start the season, but I'm not going to bench him, obviously. And when you look back to last year, it was only week 8 onwards where CeeDee Lamb went absolutely nuclear. Before that, he was averaging like 15, 16 PPR points per game. Week 8 onwards, he was averaging 26 points per game and was like the wide receiver 1 for the rest of the year. So it might be slightly bumpy to start the year, but I think CeeDee Lamb will knock the rust off pretty quickly. The running back room, I don't mind starting Rico Dowdle. I think it's clear he is going to be the RB1 there. Maybe it's not going to be huge at times, but I think he's a flex play for me, and I'm kind of happy enough with that, particularly as leagues get deeper. I think he's startable. Zeke, he'll get the goal line work, but I think he's fighting with Dalvin Cook for relevancy. And then on the Browns side, I mean, everything's just been bad for the Browns. Their offensive line's been banged up throughout the summer. They've got injuries on defense as well. Deshaun Watson, who hasn't played since week 10 last year, his shoulder is still bothering him to the point where he's really not even been able to throw every day. So now we're saying that with a banged up offensive line, facing the Cowboys defensive line, that he can go out there and survive this game. I don't know, like the vibes in Cleveland are pretty terrible. So outside of Amari Cooper, I don't really want to start many people at all. I think when you look at David Njoku, so much of his production last year came with Joe Flacco even, that I don't want to start David Njoku unless I have to.
Yeah, I'm with you. I don't want to touch anyone on this Browns offense outside of Amari Cooper. Obviously, Dak, Lamb, we know we're starting them. I think Jake Ferguson's a fringe top 12 option. The biggest concern for me is I know we're talking about Rico Dowdle as kind of, it seems like he's going to be the workhorse. My issue is that the Cowboys are going to be starting a rookie left tackle, a rookie center against one of the best pass rushers in the league. My worry is that they're basically going to say, we need an extra blocker on the field on passing downs, and that extra blocker is going to be Zeke. You know, as much as he's towards the end of his career, he's not as explosive, he's not as good a runner, he is still one of the best pass protecting backs in the entire league. And I worry that he's going to find himself on the field time and time again for his blocking, not his running or receiving. And that could potentially cap the ceiling of Rico Dowdle.
Yeah, I mean, I can see it. There have been reports out of Cowboys camp this week that Rico Dowdle, what helped him become the solidified RB1 for them was his leap that he's taken in pass protection. So until we see that, it can be a bit of a projection, but he's my RB33 this week.
Yeah. So moving across to Washington at Tampa Bay, is it a case of Jaden Daniels out the gate is going to be must-watch TV? Are we going to be putting him on one of those screens and Reds are going to be spending the entire time watching the Washington Commanders play?
He's my QB8 this week, purely because he's healthy. He's a dual threat quarterback who rushed for, what was it, like 11 rush attempts per game in college. And with the Commanders moving on from Jahan Dotson, the pass catching options, they're not plentiful. Yes, you've got Terry McLaurin. You've got Zach Ertz, who I wrote up in the DFS column. I think it's kind of hard to avoid him in this early part of the season. But then after that, you're looking at guys like Noah Brown, Diami Brown, like Luke McCaffrey. Maybe Luke McCaffrey surprises us all and is the reason why they were happy to move on from Jahan Dotson. But I'm not sure that I want to count on a rookie wide receiver with a rookie quarterback straight from the get-go. I think that Jaden Daniels can put up a high enough rushing game, and I think that Terry McLaurin can do good things, that it's going to be reasonable for their offense. But the main attraction to me in this game, and the reason why I'm so focused on it, not only for my redraft dynasty teams, but also for DFS, Washington's defense was just horrendous last year. They ranked 32nd in passing DVOA. They were constantly a team that you were looking to target wherever you could. And I think this is just going to be completely wheels up for the Bucs. This is a team that was allowing the second most fantasy points to both quarterbacks and wide receivers last year. They gave up 5.9 yards per play, and they haven't done much to solidify it. I know that Dan Quinn is a defensive-minded coach, so maybe he can improve it, but he's also had some up and down seasons coaching. So, yeah, I think Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, Baker Mayfield, absolute locks to start. If you're in a deeper league, maybe you can look at Jalen McMillan as well. On the Commanders side, I mean, we know that we're going to be starting Brian Robinson over Austin Eckler, but yeah, if you need to start Austin Eckler, I mean, that's the bed you chose, so maybe that's something which people need to do, but I wouldn't be starting him.
No, I think it's interesting you're saying about Dan Quinn. Like, we know he's a good defensive coordinator, but every defensive coordinator needs the horses, don't they? And Washington had one of the worst defenses in the league and didn't really address it. So I'd be shocked if they're even competent this year. And for me, outside of all the guys you said, the usage I'm fascinated to look at is Bucky Irvin, Jalen McMillan, two rookies. I think that if Bucky Irvin's going to start working in this early in the season, that's going to cap Rachaad White. We know he's not particularly efficient and he's kind of relied on volume. If Bucky Irvin's going to take some of that volume away, that could be seriously concerning. And then Jalen McMillan, loved him as a player, was just concerned that he's not going to get the volume. But the talk is he's going to start in 3 wide receiver sets. He could potentially be on the fantasy radar by the end of the season. So keep a monitor on both of those. They could be sneaky buy options as you head towards the end of the year. One of the sexier matchups on this entire week of football, unfortunately, is the Sunday night football game, so we don't get to put it in those DFS lineups, is the Rams at Detroit. Of course, Stafford versus Goff 2.0. Where do you want to start here, Tom?
Well, I think it's important to start with special teams because we've got Kyron Williams, who's the kick returner, and then Blake Corum, who's the punt returner. So seeing which one of those guys can get themselves out of special teams duty and onto the running back position the most is going to be particularly interesting. Obviously, I'm being a bit tongue-in-cheek with this, but the Rams, all offseason, they've talked about how Kyron Williams can be truly excellent throughout, how much trust they have in him. Blake Corum, they've talked about how impressive been with his maturity and all the reasons why they wanted to bring him in. Kyron, for me, is a player that I've been quite aggressive on at times through the offseason. I think that there's plenty of reason to believe a guy who is incredibly good last year at scoring fantasy points can continue to be so. Yes, he's not the fastest. Yes, he sometimes gets caught from behind, but I don't think Blake Corum's like a true elite breakaway runner either. I think that they're just kind of quite similar on a lot of levels. Perhaps you can correct me on that. Outside of that, though, Puka Nacua, Cooper Kupp, I've got no hesitation with either of them, particularly, Puka coming off the bursa sack injury that kept him out of training camp. All reports suggest he's healthy. I'm not looking to start Colby Parkinson this early. I think you've got to kind of see how the Rams are going to use their tight end room before you can do that. On the Lions side, start your stud, start Jared Goff if you need to. For me, he's a fringe QB1, an obvious start in super flex. Jameson Williams, I've got to see it before I can believe it with him. Yes, he's had, by all accounts, a really good offseason, but I want to see him staying on the field. I want to see him used in different ways. I don't want to see him just getting gimmick touches. And I'd start both David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs. I think that's fine. I mean, obviously not in the same lineup, most likely, but we've seen enough from them to know that they can both get there.
Yeah, I think a couple of interesting points there. Jameson Williams, to me, his usage is going to be everything. If he's not getting used almost as an every down player, seeing significant target volume, I'd be getting shot as quickly as possible. We've seen him do very little through the first 2 years. There is an awful lot of hype on him through the offseason. If he's not going to get it in week one, I don't believe it's ever going to happen. So that's one that if you have got Jameson Williams shares, you need to react very quickly to. Colby Parkinson, look, there's some potential there. I kind of see the role. I kind of see that he could be relevant. If you're having to start Colby Parkinson week one, something has gone drastically wrong in your draft or in the Dynasty League, you've had all off season to address it. Like, come on, you've got to have better options than Colby Parkinson. And on the Kyron Williams and Blake Corum point, I mean, they're basically carbon copies of each other. It's so weird. I talked about it on the Dynasty show last week. I've never seen so many offenses go, we're going to have two backs that are basically the exact same. We see it in Tennessee. We're seeing it again in LA. I think that we're going to see Kyron Williams still be north of a 70% opportunity guy, and it's wheels up, and I'm really excited about what he could be this year. Moving across to the Monday night football game. Now, this is a really, really fascinating, interesting matchup for NFL purposes. But is this just an avoid fantasy?
It's definitely not ideal on a number of levels when you consider it that the Jets and the Niners both should have good defenses. Yes, defensive play can regress year to year, and it's not always the most sticky, but I think there's enough talent on both rosters on defense that this should still be pretty good. The Niners, obviously, Brandon Ayuk hasn't practiced for the vast majority of the offseason. Trent Williams hasn't practiced for the majority of the offseason. Now, those are talented guys. They shouldn't need too much time, but you'd like to imagine that they had a little bit of time still. Obviously, playing on Monday night, it gives them an extra day, but I'm a little bit nervous about Ayuk, and I'm struggling to put him too high in my rankings this week. If I have a stacked roster and I can avoid it, then it's something I might consider. Just, I mean, you can see the over-under set of 43.5. This isn't the highest over-under of the week. The position which I think is fine is Deebo Samuel. He's had a great training camp by all reports, really looked his best he's looked in a couple of years. I think sometimes when you look at these kind of cornerback matchups with guys like Sauce Gardner and that, instead Deebo, who plays into a lot more zone-based looks and stuff like that, can be the first read near the line of scrimmage. It suits him. I think when you look at George Kittle, he can have a good week because, correct me if I'm wrong, but the Jets aren't always particularly great against tight ends. And then obviously CMC and Breece Hall should both be automatic picks. You don't spend a first-round pick on a guy and then sit him.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, this is one of those lineups that it feels very consolidated. You know, you're starting both running backs, you're starting both quarterbacks in Superflex leagues. You're not touching them in one QB. You're starting Debo, you're starting Garrett Wilson, you're starting Kittle. And then the only one that you've kind of got question marks over is Brandon Ayuk. I still think he's a top 24 option. I'm incredibly nervous that he could be rusty. I'm incredibly nervous that he's going up against the best cornerback trio in the entire league in Sauce Gardner, DJ Reed, and Michael Carter II. But I still think he's a top 24 option for me this week. And then I'm not touching anyone else. I'm not touching any of the Jets wide receivers or receiving games. I'm not touching the tight ends. And I think there's a few people talking up Jordan Mason this week. That's too cute for me. I think that, look, CMC, we know he's got the calf injury, but if you're starting Jordan Mason in week one, again, your draft's probably gone very wrong.
Yeah, it's just overthinking it a bit. We know that when CMC is healthy or even near healthy, Kyle Shanahan, he doesn't care. He just absolutely loads CMC up with touches. You're talking like 19 touches a game or so last year. I've got Brandon Ayuk at wide receiver 30, which maybe I'm playing a little bit scared on him, but yeah, I just don't have the confidence this week.
I'm absolutely gobsmacked to hear, Tom, that you're too low on Brandon Ayuk yet again. It feels like it's been a 2-year tribe. Now we've been tracking on this
last year.
Moving into Thursday night football, tonight's game as we are recording it, Baltimore at Kansas City. Tom, on a scale of 1 to 10, how excited are you about Derrick Henry in purple?
Derrick Henry in purple with a lead blocker in the shape of Patrick Ricard. Like, this is going to be beastly. Henry, he's faced 120 more 8-man boxes than any other running back over the last 2 years, which it tells you everything you need to know. Defenses, they run scared of Derrick Henry. They load up the line of scrimmage to try and stop him as soon as possible. It's going to be really difficult for teams to do that because Lamar Jackson's been one of the best quarterbacks in EPA versus stacked boxes over the years. Lamar, yeah, there's problems with his downfield throwing connections at times, but he's excellent and efficient at dealing with defenses when they give him favorable passing matchups. So I'm completely believing that this is going to be a really good tandem of Derrick Henry and Lamar Jackson on a number of levels. As for Ravens in general, I don't think they can win today because even if they beat the Chiefs by 15 points or so, everyone's just going to say, well, go and do it in the playoffs. It doesn't matter because the Ravens bottled the playoffs. So it's going to be an interesting one to see how the Ravens mentally approach this game. I'm expecting a second year from Zay Flowers. I think you can automatically start him. Second year wide receiver breakouts. That's what we've been betting on for years. And there's plenty of examples of it working. Yes, Zay Flowers' splits with Mark Andrews last year were quite prominent, but it was also just a rookie who grew into the season and then earned his role in the red zone as things went on. Mark Andrews, for me, has been incredibly undervalued this year. Outside of those guys, I don't think I'm starting Rashad Bateman, Justice Hill, Isaiah Likely. I think they're all clear sits. On the Chiefs side, it's going to be very interesting to see how much Xavier Worthy's involved. There was a couple of quotes from people within the NFL media landscape this week talking about how much Andy Reid would like that one big week one Xavier Worthy highlight play. And I'm hoping it's him getting absolutely mugged by Nate Higgins at cornerback for the Ravens instead. But yeah, putting my bias aside, it's just a great match to open up the season with, and the start sits feel fairly clear.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very exciting. I'm fascinated to see that Jerick McKinnon role for Isaiah Pacheco, or is it going to be Samaje Perine coming in and taking him off the field? We saw last year that Isaiah Pacheco wasn't the same guy with McKinnon playing. I think it was around 5 points per game difference in terms of games. No, it was more than that. It was 9 points per game more he scored. He averaged 21.8 points per game in games without Jerick McKinnon. He only averaged 12.7 points per game in games where Jerick McKinnon played. If Samaje Perine is going to come in and take over that entire third down, 2-minute drill, passing game work, Jerick McKinnon's probably going to be a very, very expensive and disappointing pick. If Isaiah Pacheco can take over that McKinnon role, then all of a sudden he's going to be a potential league winner. So I'm absolutely fascinated by that. The big question, though, Tom, do you have the cojones to start Rashad Bateman this week?
No. I mean, look, Rashad Bateman, I'm still in on him. The guys at Fantasy Points were tweeting yesterday about how he ranked third in their new wide receiver separation metric last year. And I think that there's going to be an improvement from Rashad Bateman. This was his first fully healthy offseason since he came into the NFL. And even then, he missed about a week of training after he fell on a ball and hurt his ribs at one point. So, yeah, there's a part of me that is holding out hope on Rashad Bateman, but we're probably talking about a guy who gets, 50 catches, 60 catches at best and puts up 600, 650 yards and maybe 6 touchdowns. And if that happens, he's going to pay off his ADP, even in best ball, even in redraft leagues. But knowing when to start Bateman, I think there'll be better days for it than against this Chiefs defense.
Yeah, we know the Chiefs secondary is up there, one of the best in the league. So not expecting huge things from some of those guys. The final matchup of the week we're going to talk about, though, the Friday night football in Brazil. It's week 1, Tom. But is this an absolute must-win game for the Eagles after everything that happened to end last year?
It'd be fun if they didn't, to see the Nick Sirianni situation, because, I mean, that is a man he's an angry man. The Eagles fans don't necessarily seem to particularly have an awful lot of love for him. And, yeah, I mean, it seems like there were elements of his coaching staff which have been pushed onto him by the Eagles front office rather than it being always a Nick Sirianni desire. But with Kellen Moore there calling the plays, I know Kellen Moore has been a bit of a fake sharp over the last couple of years. We thought that getting him away from Jerry Jones and the Cowboys would just unleash this incredible play caller. And then you looked at what happened with the Chargers and it was kind of up and down. But the two things that we know that we're going to get from Kellen Moore is we're going to see more motion, which the Eagles were like bottom 3 in motion at the point of snap last year. And we're also going to see more pace. Every team that Kellen Moore's been on has been incredibly good with pace. So now, if you're talking about pass catchers like Devonta Smith and AJ Brown, who are going to see more pace, which results in more plays per game, then that's only going to be a good thing. I've been fading Saquon Barkley all off season. I think that it's a really difficult one for me because I don't envisage him getting enough goal line touches. I don't envisage him getting enough pass catching looks. And also, Kenneth Gainwell and Will Shipley have mixed in so consistently through the offseason, whilst the Eagles have rested Barkley at times, saying they don't want to push him too early. So, yeah, but on the flip side of this, the Packers were awful against the run last year. So if you drafted Saquon Barkley, you should feel very good going into this matchup. He's not somebody I'd be targeting for DFS, though. I think that I just want to lean into the Eagles pass catchers. Then on the Packers side, just need some clarity. Need to see, can Christian Watson stay healthy? Need to see, is Jaden Reed still the guy? Like, is Romeo Doubs the guy who leads the team in snaps and targets, all that kind of stuff? But at tight end, I'm really pleased to see if Tucker is healthy. He had a really strong joint training camp practice session against the Ravens. And Tucker Kraft is one of my most rostered players in best ball. I think that by the end of this season, things will have flipped and he'll be the tight end one there in Green Bay.
I love that. I love that. Big Tucker Craft fan, so I'm all on board with that as well. The biggest thing I'm looking at is Devonta Smith out of the slot. Like, this is a guy who has the record in college for yards per route run from the slot, where he averaged 4.96 yards per route run out of the slot. Since entering the league, he has averaged 2.48 yards per route run from the slot and 1.66 on all other routes out wide. Like, his splits are absolutely wild. He's one of the best slot receivers in the league, and yet he's hardly getting used there. If he is going to be Kellen Moore's slot, we have seen CeeDee Lamb absolutely feast out there. And we saw last year Keenan Allen had a career year at playing primarily out of the slot. So it could be wheels up for Devonta Smith if he is going to be out of the slot. I guess the kind of question mark, we talked about the Packers receiving weapons being a bit of a headache this week, but Dallas Goedert, we've not seen him practicing much with this oblique injury. Looks like he is going to play. Are you comfortable starting him? You've probably drafted him as your tight end one. Is he a top 12 option for you this week?
Let me see where I've got him in my rankings. I do like Dallas Goedert, and I think that he's perhaps been slept on a little bit. I've got him at tight end 11, just behind Jake Ferguson and just ahead of David Njoku, who, yeah, let's say I'm a little cool on David Njoku. So, yeah, I think he is that fringe tight end one. If you took him within the first 12 tight ends, then, yeah, you probably going to have to start him. I don't think the Green Bay defense is anything to be scared of from a matchup perspective. So I don't mind that. I think maybe for Dallas Goedert to get back to his most fantasy relevant, we'd need to see him getting all the screen production that he used to get back when Shane Steichen was the offensive coordinator. I'm not sure that's necessarily going to happen, but Kellen Moore's been around offenses which have featured tight ends. So yeah, I'm fine with that. Otherwise, you kind of start the guys you need to in this one and hope that it swings their way rather than to the guys who you faded.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm at tight end 11 as well on Goddard. The only guy probably drafted after him that I'd start over him is, of course, Taysom Hill, who's wheels up for this week. But that is it. That concludes the entire slate of action. Make sure you've hit that subscribe button. Tom will be back very soon with all of his DFS content. Of course, exclusive for members, a lot of the good stuff. So hit that join button below. And of course, we have also got Tyler joining us on Sunday for a live start sit show. Make sure you get all of those lineups set up before we get into the slate of week.